It was a ready-made meme. Je suis Charlie. I am Charlie. We are all Charlie. Journalists clicked that message of solidarity, and it traveled fast. But what were they expressing solidarity with, exactly? Because, as one writer put it, as the headlines screamed of attacks on freedom, to abhor what was done to the victims is not the same as to become them.
Very few of the people saying this have offended or published the same type of material that Charlie Hebdo does. Some newspapers have said we would never publish this kind of offensive content anyway, so it doesn't make a difference. It shouldn't make a difference now whether we do or not. But I think as a simple expression of solidarity, you know, there is nothing wrong with the Je suis Charlie idea.
It's very easy and actually important to say that we sympathise with those who've been killed, that we oppose the brutal close-range execution of journalists. But it doesn't mean that we have to say that Charlie Hebdo is okay, that everything they did was fine.
It's a way of showing solidarity. But it is ambiguous, and I wouldn't use it personally. I'm not Charlie, I'm against the position, and I think, and I have attacked the position which was, in my opinion, very counterproductive inside our society. But at the same time, of course, they have the right to have it, and of course, nobody has the right to kill them. I mean, this is important.
The headlines come within a much broader context, which is none of us have yet begun to have a moment really to take stock of what's really happened and what this means. And so we seek ready answers, and one way of trying to make sense of it is to put it within this bigger story that we purportedly understand, the bigger story of freedom of expression.
Charlie Hebdo has been in the news sporadically ever since 2006, when it made the point of publishing the Danish cartoons that offended so many. 5 years later, after the publication's offices were firebombed, the Paris bureau chief for Time magazine wrote, "Defending freedom of expression in the face of oppression is one thing. Insisting on the right to be obnoxious and offensive just because you can is infantile." So yeah, the violence inflicted upon Charlie Hebdo was outrageous, unacceptable, condemnable, and illegal. But apart from the illegal bit, Charlie Hebdo's current edition is all of the above too. Commentators in the media are usually loath to speak critically of the dead, especially of the victims of such a cruel mass murder. Richard Seymour, an author and academic, was the exception this past week when he wrote, "The argument will be that for the sake of good taste, we need a decent interval before we start criticizing Charlie Hebdo. But given the scale of the ongoing anti-Muslim backlash in France, and given the ideological purposes to which this atrocity will be put, it is essential to get this right. There's a critical difference between solidarity with the journalists attacked and solidarity with what is frankly a racist publication."
What I mean by that is there's a kind of cynical, in my opinion, whitewashing going on of this publication, which did produce some quite crass, adolescent, racist material. And we should acknowledge that. And it doesn't justify anything that took place. It doesn't necessarily even explain what took place. But it does put into context the reaction that we're going to see now, the reaction that we're already seeing. So in order to even start this conversation properly, we just need to acknowledge that there is a problem.
It's a magazine which is offensive, certainly, but it is equal opportunities offensive. It will mock Christians, it will mock Jews, it will mock Muslims, it will mock anyone in French society. It is not particularly geared towards offending one group. It satirizes everybody equally.
Charlie Hebdo does go after just about everybody, but not necessarily equally. Look back at its cover stories from the past year and you will find a disproportionate number about Muslims, who make up about 7% of the French population. Satire is supposed to mock the powerful, and even when the magazine skewers right-wing fears over immigrants, it uses racialized images of pregnant Muslim women supposedly taking advantage of the French welfare state, women who tend to be more underprivileged than they are powerful. But, as we learned in 2010, it's not like anything goes at Charlie Hebdo.
When one of their writers, Maurice Sinet, wrote something disgustingly anti-Semitic about the son of the French Prime Minister Nicolas Sarkozy, the magazine quite rightly fired him. So they had standards, they have a moral compass. It just so happens that their moral compass didn't extend to the Muslim community of France.
France is a mostly Catholic country with a strong secular streak. Laws separating church and state were passed more than a century ago and remain in place. Many French Christians practice their religion, but see the lack of reverence for political and religious figures and the right to blaspheme as signs of a healthy democracy. However, those laws were written in a different era, with the Vatican and not Mecca in mind.
The Catholic Church was really an important political power, not religious. I mean, religious, of course, but also political. In this time, it was against democracy, against the Republic, etc. So the right of blasphemy was accepted in this context of struggle. Of course, today it has a complete different meaning, but the law has not changed, and you can be with the right of blasphemy, and I am not in favor of changing the law in France and saying that some of the blasphemy are really counterproductive.
So it's a very interesting question, isn't it? Whether we should have the right to blaspheme religions. I think that, you know, it goes hand in hand for me in terms of thinking about ourselves as developing mature democracies, and we have to, you know, have the responsibilities, it seems to me, that go with those rights within a mature multicultural democracy. And so I think that the right to say this or that has to always be one that we interrogate and we think about, and we don't just take it for granted that actually we have the right to say anything.
In the early 1990s, a term coined almost a century ago came back into vogue: the clash of civilizations. The idea that people's cultural and religious identities would be the primary source of future conflicts. The term was trotted out again this past week. But is that what really happened in Paris? Is a conflict between a relative few who use their mighty pens to provoke and defend, and a few others who use the gun to murder and silence? Is that a clash of civilizations, or is it just a clash of an uncivilized few? That's something the politicians dealing with the aftermath and the media reporting on it might want to keep in mind.